Today on Twin Cam, part 2 of our gander around the NEC Classic Motor Show. If you didn't catch part 1, then I'll put a card up in the corner, but let's start afresh here with something alternative and really rather wonderful. A 1989 Yugo Sana. Better known as the Zastava Florida, this was the final car launched and built by the company. As you'd expect for an Eastern Bloc car, it has its roots in a Fiat, the Tipo. It was styled by Giugiaro and used Fiat engines as well. But even without that information, you can see the Tipo deep within its styling. The Sana was launched in 1987, a period where Zastava had built itself a small but solid niche across Western markets, especially the United States. And the new car hoped to continue that and build upon it. But timing wasn't on its side. 1987 and Yugoslavia aren't a good mix, and production ended in this form during the war in 1992. The car did survive through to 2008 in various forms, however, but a UK market Yugo Sana like this is a very rare car. This one's only recently been rescued following a quarter of a century in a barn after its owner passed away in 1996. And the number plate nerds among you will be shouting at the screen, because yes, that's a DL plate, so it's from the Isle of Wight. Let's stick with the Eastern Bloc theme, but switch to a country actually aligned with the USSR, East Germany, and their icon of oppression, the Trabant. Now, to be fair to the little thing, these were perfectly acceptable when they were launched in 1957. They were front-wheel drive, had independent suspension, and were built with a lightweight, cheap material, the famous Duraplast. Essentially, that's a fibre-reinforced plastic. However, they also came with a tiny, massively underpowered two-stroke engine. But the real problem was that because of the nature of the GDR's economy, they just kept making them. When the West was all driving Opel Kadets, the East was stuck with Trabants. That was, if you could even get one. But after the war was taken down, the Trabant did continue in production, albeit with a modern 1043cc water-cooled Volkswagen engine also used in the Mark II Golf. This isn't a Mark II Golf, but I needed to make the link somehow. The Mark I Golf story is massively overtold, but what surprises me is the consistency in almost every Mark I Golf that's shown at car shows. They're all on bags, they've all had base shaves, and they all have comically oversized wheels. It'd be great if there was some individuality, but they're all the bloody same, which is why I bring you this one. Yes, this one's been base shaved too, but it's immaculate and could appear to the majority as a factory car. Then there's the colour. If there are two things the 1970s did right, it's colours and car styling. Giugiaro designed what I think is possibly the best looking car of this size of all time. It's just so crisp and so intricate in its simplicity, with the shallow bumpers and smaller rear lamps of the early cars like this one just demonstrating that simplicity further. Volkswagen weren't at all a pioneer of the modern transverse engine front drive formula, but they did make a big point of it. And in that decade, almost everything switched to that basic layout, with Ford, 2 years later, bringing us the Fiesta. Compared to the Golf, this Fiesta Popular is in a much more sober colour scheme, but that suits it, because the Pop is the base model. The Dove Grey and Indian Red vinyl combination was only available for a year, so this is a very rare car, and this example is on the pride of ownership, having covered only 3,000 miles in its 41-year life. It has to be one of the best examples of the original Fiesta, never mind a basic one. But let's turn that totally on its head by switching over to Hall 8, where it's just Fords, so they can all keep to themselves, and this beautiful little Fiesta Supersport. When the Fiesta was launched, there wasn't an out-and-out hot version. There was the 1300S, but that doesn't really count. Of course, the eventual proper hot Fiesta was the XR2, launched in 1981. But as a stopgap for just a short while, there was the Supersport. Engine-wise, it's not actually any hotter than the S. It uses the same 1298cc Kent engine producing 65 brake horsepower. But the point of the Supersport is the style, and that's what the 1300S lacked, because this is a fabulously cool little thing, with its 4-spoke RS alloys, plastic body kit, quad driving lamps and Carla interior trim. I don't usually like black cars, but there are certain times where it works, and I adore this. The red stripes just work so well with it. There's nothing more really to say before we get into full swoon territory. Tremendous. But as we know, Ford were good at this. We saw it in the first video with the Cortinas, but let's move down a size and up one from the Fiestas to meet a Mark II Escort Mexico. Sorry for the lack of any wide shots here, but by this point the show was open and it was difficult to get the room to be able to have a decent video shot. But compared to the Fiesta, the Mexico is a simple and fuss-free sport version, as were all the Mark II Escorts. The Mark II Mexico used a 1600cc overhead cam Pinto engine, an improvement over the Kent in the Mark I Mexico. But despite the fame in the name, the Mexico wasn't the hottest Mark II Escort. That title would go to the RS 1800 with its Cosworth engineered power unit and 115 brake horsepower output. But having mentioned the elder Escort, across the hall there's a pair of Escort 1300Es, which are very much a smaller version of the Cortina 1600E we saw in part 1. So unlike the Mexicos, these are posh executive Escorts, complete with lots of chrome, square headlamps and the ever so 70s blacked out rear panel. They're even on the correct reflective raised digit plates. Glorious. As you'd guess by the name, these cars are powered by the 1300cc overhead valve Kent engine, the same basic unit that would see servicing Fords all the way through to the 21st century. But in this era, they're all topped by blue airboxes, as was the Pinto in the Mark II Mexico. But in this purple car, that just looks a bit odd. The colours don't go at all, so a lot of owners, like that of this blue car, painted the airbox in body colour. On a separate note, rear drive Escort engine bays are remarkably clutter-free. But this market really isn't filled by Ford anymore. The lower ranking executives aren't at all interested in a Focus. Instead, they're after something like a BMW. But in the 60s, they were only really finding their feet, albeit with brilliant little cars like the O2 series, the predecessor to the modern 3 series, and this car is a 1602, meaning it has a 1600cc M10 engine, the same unit that would end up under the bonnet of both the E21 and E30. The O2 was launched in 1966 as, essentially, a cut-down 2-door version of the new class saloons, entering BMW into a more compact market, one it now calls its own in many parts of the world. But these were the early days, and the reverence in which the larger engine 2002 is now held is indicative of how the company became such a force. I still maintain, though, it's not as good looking as a Triumph Dolomite. But by the time Triumph was dead and buried, BMW were storming forwards. And though we've already seen an E30 M3 in part 1, here's totally the other end of the scale, a 316. No I. As I alluded to, this will have the same 1600cc M10 engine as the 1602, and with the lack of an I, this will have a carburettor feeding it fuel. These things are so rare in the UK, partly because the carburettor-fed E30s didn't last very long, but mainly because at the time, the vast majority of BMW customers specced up their cars, as you'd expect in choosing such a car in the first place. But what a car it is! So elegant and restrained compared to the behemoths of aggression they're pumping out today. Back when that badge really meant something. This car was over on the Maguire stand with all the other brilliantly detailed cars of all different types, including this Renault 11 Turbo. In the 70s and 80s, Renault were the pioneers of successful turbocharging technology, almost single-handedly moving it from niche to mainstream status in Grand Prix racing, rallying and road cars. For over a decade, all the hot Renaults made their power through snails on their exhausts, and the 11 is no different. In fact, these things have some serious pedigree, because under the bonnet is a detuned version of that in the mid-engined Group B Renault 5 Turbo. Now, in reality, this wasn't that special, being a version of the Cléon engine in loads of Renaults. But driving one of these, you could tell everyone that you had Grand Prix pedigree in using a turbocharger, Group B pedigree in using the same basic power unit as the R5, and the Renault 11 itself was mildly successful in rallying. But speaking of the Renault 5, they're incredibly pretty little things, and there was a selection of them over in a corner. I was particularly taken by this facelifted car, with the wheels and stance all making the most of Michel Bou's shape. But I seem to have only taken this one shot of it. It's the way these things go when you're running around with mates looking at cars, but I did take some more shots of the car next to it, this earlier orange Renault 5 TL, complete with its original, truly French ride height. For a Super Mini from the 70s and early 80s, the R5 is quite unusual, because rather than going for struts and a transverse engine, the Renault has torsion bars all round and a longitudinally mounted Cléon engine driving the front wheels. In fact, the R5 is really a rebodied Renault 4, but it was more than good enough to last the course, because the Renault 5 was a truly great car. But as I mentioned, it's the utilitarian beauty of this shape that does it for me. There's so much flat metal in the styling of this car that it's hard to describe why it's so characterful. It's just so perfect. And though it's a size smaller, it's the only car that can come close to being as good looking as the Mark I Golf. For our final car in today's video, let's move across that hall to a little Peugeot 104, a car I feel is forgotten in the midst of the Renault. But being launched in 1972, the same year as the R5, the Peugeot is arguably the more interesting car. It may not have had racing pedigree, but the 104 spawned a number of children. They made 1.6 million of these, and then there's the Citroën LN, Citroën Visa, and the Talbot Samba, all of which owe their heritage to one of these. Under the body, the engine and gearbox were co-developed with Renault, the little suitcase engine, and following the philosophy of the Mini, they share their oil. Again, the 70s are bringing all the bright colours, and it's all the better for it. And with that, thank you very much for watching this second part of our gander around the NEC. In a few days there'll be another one, so be sure to click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well to make sure you catch it. If you fancy it, I also have a Patreon, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll see you all on Wednesday.